So here I am, sitting at the dining table in our apartment downtown. It's one of those moments when you're just staring at your laptop, scrolling through a million things, trying to finalize everything for the wedding. I've always been the guy who handles the details, you know? I'm 32 now, and for years I've worked my butt off in business consulting. I've built a good life, kept things private, and made sure I was the steady one in the relationship, the one who just gets things done. I've always been a bit of an introvert, honestly. People tend to think that's just because I don't have much to say. But it's not that. I just don't speak unless I have something worth saying. I guess you could say I prefer silence over noise, which isn't always the easiest thing to explain. People tend to think I'm, distant, unemotional. Whatever it is, it's part of who I am. But I'm okay with that. Until recently, I thought Laura understood that too. Laura, my fiancé, is 29, and she's everything I'm not. She's outgoing, bubbly, always the life of the party, and she's got this charm that just pulls people in. We met a couple of years ago, and man, it felt like we just clicked. I've always tried to make her feel special, you know? She's been my whole world, and everything I've done lately has been for this wedding, for her. I didn't mind covering everything, all the costs, booking the venue, the flights for her family, the flowers, the fancy dinner, the works. I didn't want her to worry about a thing. I wanted to give her the day of her dreams. But lately, it's been a little off. Like, she's been distracted, and honestly, I've been feeling more like an afterthought than the guy who's supposed to be at the center of all this. The wedding was coming up fast, and while I was buried in details, Laura seemed to be in her own little world. Anyway, that day started like any other. I was at the table, making sure all the last-minute things were covered. I was deep into the numbers, calculating flights, deposits, and all that jazz. I could hear the soft click of the keys as I typed, the only sound in the room. It felt so still. I looked at the receipts lined up in front of me, totaling everything up, and I realized how much I had invested, emotionally and financially, in this day. I was doing everything for us. Then she walked in. She had that relaxed energy about her, wearing her loose white robe, her hair down in soft waves. Her eyes were glued to her phone as she laughed at something, probably a text from one of her friends, and I couldn't help but smile. She walked over, kissed me on the cheek like she always does, sweet but quick, and then went straight to the fridge to grab a drink. "Hey," she said, casually, still scrolling. I added a few people to the after-party list. I paused, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. "What kind of people?" I asked, my voice flat but confused. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Oh, just some people from the past. Raphael and Matthias. You know, just a few old faces." And just like that, everything shifted. Raphael, her ex-husband. Matthias, her ex-boyfriend who had once caused a scene at her birthday party, getting drunk and fighting some guy at the door. That was the last time I had seen him. I didn't know what to say at first. I just stared at her. Raphael? Matthias? Here? At our wedding? I tried to stay calm, but I could feel my chest tightening. "You invited your ex-husband to our wedding party?" I asked, my voice finally breaking through the silence. I set my laptop aside and tried to keep my cool, but I was definitely rattled. "It's just a party, babe, not a wedding," she said, tossing the words off like they didn't matter. "It's all chill, just a casual vibe, you know?" The room got cold. I mean, really cold. And she didn't even notice. She was still swiping away on her phone, not even giving me a second to process what she'd just said. I tried to keep it together. "It's just a party," I kept telling myself. "It's just a few people from her past." But then I asked, "Do you really think that's appropriate?" She sighed, not looking at me. "Oh, come on, Lucas, you're being ridiculous. Raphael's remarried. Matthias is just there for drinks, I'm telling you, it's no big deal. Honestly, you're overreacting. Just relax." Insecure, that's what she said. And there it was. The thing I hated hearing most. She dismissed everything I felt, turning it into my problem. It wasn't disrespect. It wasn't the weirdness of having two exes show up to a party meant to celebrate our future. No. It was me being insecure. And she said it like I was the one causing the issue. I just stood there, frozen, for what felt like forever. I couldn't believe how easily she said it. Insecure. The word stung more than I expected, and the worst part? It wasn't even true. Sure, I felt uncomfortable, but this wasn't about jealousy. This was about respect. Or, well, the lack of it. But before I could say anything more, the door opened, and in walked her mom, Maria, with a smug smile plastered on her face. She was carrying a bag from a high-end store, looking like she'd just come from a shopping spree. She tossed a glance at me, barely acknowledging my presence, and then shot off her usual passive-aggressive line. "Still whining about the guest list, Lucas?" I blinked, trying to process it. What the hell was going on here? This wasn't her wedding. This was supposed to be our day, but all of a sudden I felt like I was a guest at a show where everyone else had the script but me. Maria raised an eyebrow at me, then said, "You're really going to make a scene over this? If you don't like it, we can just give your spot to someone else." She didn't even give me a chance to answer before she continued. "Oh, and guess who's flying in just to make things extra special? Jaime." "Jaime?" I stood there in disbelief. "You're kidding, right?" I muttered. Maria smirked. "Jaime Lel, sweetie. Sienna's childhood crush. He's flying in. Should be fun, huh?" I was silent, stunned. My head was spinning. This was all happening so fast, and it wasn't even funny. I wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't the groom. I was the accessory to her story. It hit me like a punch in the gut, but I didn't show it. I couldn't. What was the point? It was all just one big joke, wasn't it? I looked at Laura, who was now grinning with her mom, both of them laughing like it was the funniest thing in the world. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't about me. It never had been. This was her show, her performance, and I was just a prop. I stood there for a moment, unable to speak, but I knew, deep down, that something had to give. This was more than just a wedding. This was about respect. And I was losing mine, piece by piece. "Did you really invite your ex-husband to our wedding?" Lucas asked, his voice heavier than he intended. There was no way to hide the mistrust in his tone, no way to fake it. Laura looked at him, her eyes soft, as if he was overreacting to something trivial. "Calm down, Lucas," she said with a reassuring smile, as if this was a minor detail. "It's just a party, okay? Raphael is married now, and Mateus is just a friend, nothing to worry about." She said it so casually, as if she didn't realize the gravity of what she was saying. Raphael, the guy who was her ex-husband, the one who had been in her life for years, was now being invited to their wedding celebration? And Mateus, the ex-boyfriend who once showed up drunk and got into a fight at her birthday party? Lucas froze for a moment, trying to process it. The words felt like a punch, but he didn't want to seem controlling. He didn't want to make a scene. He never did. That's just not who he was. But when he heard Laura throw the word insecure at him, like it was a judgment, something inside him cracked. "Insecure?" he repeated quietly, though it stung like a slap. His fists clenched involuntarily. He wasn't insecure, not at all. What he was hurt. He wasn't even jealous. He was just disrespected. But Lucas didn't argue. Instead, he nodded slowly, feeling the weight of her words. "Okay," he said, his voice calmer than he felt. "It's your choice." But the problem wasn't just Raphael or Mateus. No. It was the way Laura shrugged it off, the way she dismissed his feelings like they were unimportant. She hadn't even thought about how this would affect him, how it would feel for him to stand there, at their own wedding, surrounded by people who had once been part of her past. It made him feel invisible, like he wasn't even a part of the equation. As the days passed, the feeling of being irrelevant began to settle in his chest, a dull, nagging ache that wouldn't go away. The more he thought about it, the more it hurt. How could she just ignore his discomfort? His trust in her was something he valued deeply, but it seemed like she was taking that trust for granted. Lucas found himself lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, feeling the room close in on him. Was this really the woman he was about to marry? The woman he had been so sure about? Everything felt off, like the foundation of their relationship was slowly crumbling, but no one was talking about it. Then, as if on cue, there was the knock at the door. He opened it to find Laura's mother, Helena, standing in the doorway with that smug little smile she always wore. Her eyes immediately flicked past him to scan the room, her gaze dismissive. "You're still complaining about the guest list?" she asked, her tone sharp and laced with sarcasm. Lucas was taken aback. He didn't expect Helena to come in like that, making him feel even smaller than he already did. He was already dealing with the disappointment of Laura's dismissive attitude, and now Helena was here, further devaluing his concerns. "Please, Lucas, don't make this into something bigger than it is," Helena continued as she breezed past him into the living room. She was holding a bag from a fancy store as usual, her heels clicking on the floor like the sound of someone who knew they were in control. "It's just a party. Don't make a scene." Lucas stood there, feeling completely powerless. Here he was, doing everything he could to make this wedding perfect for Laura, and he was being dismissed like he was just another guest. Not the groom, not the man she was supposed to be building a life with, but just another person in the background of her story. Helena plopped down on the couch, casually mentioning, "Well, if you don't like the guest list, we can always give your spot to Jaime." She paused, then looked at him with that condescending smile. "Jaime Lel, sweetheart. You remember him, right? Laura's little childhood crush, he's flying in. I'm sure you two will get along just fine." "Jaime." The name hit Lucas like a cold wave. Jaime had been the guy before him, the guy who had always been the one to make Laura laugh, the one who had been there before Lucas even existed in her life. And now, Jaime was coming to their wedding. But what struck Lucas the most was how casually it was all being discussed, as if he didn't even matter. He wasn't even important enough to be a central figure in his own wedding. Instead, he was just a placeholder, something to stand there while everyone else ran the show. His hands felt clammy, his heart pounding, but he said nothing. What could he say? This wasn't a conversation. This was an ultimatum. Laura had made her choice, and Helena was backing it up, smoothing everything over with her well-rehearsed comments, brushing off his concerns like they were irrelevant. Laura entered the room shortly after, laughing about something with Helena. Lucas felt like a ghost in his own home, as if he didn't belong there. He could feel the panic rising in his chest, but he didn't let it show. He wanted to be strong, calm, rational. But how could he, when everything about this wedding was starting to feel like a twisted joke? "So, we're all set for the wedding, huh?" Laura said, her voice light, almost carefree. She didn't even notice the change in his demeanor, the way he was pulling away. "Yeah, sure," Lucas muttered, forcing a smile. "All set." But in his mind, the cracks were getting wider. He was no longer sure about this. The wedding wasn't a celebration of their love anymore. It was a performance, and he wasn't even a part of it. He excused himself shortly after, retreating to the guest room, but the damage was done. In that moment, Lucas realized something. This wedding wasn't for him. It wasn't about him. It was about Laura and her world. And he was just a background character in her life. The tension between Lucas and Laura continued to build as the wedding day drew closer. Every night, Lucas lay awake, his mind racing over every detail, every interaction they'd had. He began to notice things he had once ignored, things that should have been red flags. He realized that Laura's dismissive attitude towards him was disguised as lightheartedness. The calmness he had once prided himself on, the ability to remain silent when things went wrong, was now seen as weakness in her eyes. He'd always thought he was doing the right thing by not raising his voice, by avoiding unnecessary confrontations. But now it just felt like he was invisible, a passive observer in his own life. That night, the night before the wedding, Lucas found himself alone in their bedroom. The house was eerily quiet, and for once, he wished there was some noise to drown out his thoughts. His mind wandered back to all the small moments leading up to this day, the ones that should have mattered. He could feel the weight of everything around him, the decorations, the dress, the flowers. All of it was supposed to represent their love, but it wasn't love. It was an event, a show, and he was just the groom who happened to be standing on the sidelines. Then there was the knock at the door. Lucas didn't move at first. Who could be coming here now? But then the door opened, and there she was, Helena, Laura's mother, standing in the doorway with a bottle of wine in one hand and that damn controlling smile on her face. It was a smile that Lucas had come to recognize, one that said she knew everything and he knew nothing. "Lucas," she said as she strolled in, "I think you're overestimating all this. Laura deserves to be happy, doesn't she?" Her voice was smooth, calculated. It wasn't a question. It was a command, as if he had no right to disagree. It was her way of telling him to shut up, to sit back and accept whatever came his way, to stop thinking so much and just play the part he was meant to play. And God, he was so tired of playing that part. "I'm not saying she doesn't," Lucas replied, his voice measured but his insides churning. "But happiness doesn't mean disrespect." Helena gave him a look, one of those looks that said she had already won. She didn't need to argue with him. She knew he would never speak up the way she expected him to. He was too calm, too passive, the kind of man who let things slide. Lucas stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't say anything else. He was done fighting these people, at least not like this. He was done with the manipulative smiles, the way Helena always made him feel smaller than he was. He couldn't keep playing the good guy if it meant losing himself in the process. The next day, the wedding was set to take place. As the final hours ticked down, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. The entire day felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He wasn't supposed to feel like this. He was supposed to feel happy, the man about to marry the woman he loved. But instead, he felt like an actor in a show he hadn't even signed up for. The morning was tense. The air between him and Laura was thick with unspoken words. She was getting ready in the other room, and he could hear her moving around, preparing herself for the day. He stood in front of the mirror for a while, trying to collect his thoughts. But all he could think of was how everything felt wrong. He had spent so much of his life trying to be a good man, trying to be supportive and quiet, but it wasn't working anymore. He felt like he was losing himself. And for what? So she could have her perfect day while he stood there pretending everything was fine? When Laura finally appeared in front of him, wearing her beautiful white dress and smiling with that same radiant glow, he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. Not for his feelings, but for the fact that he wasn't going to let this happen. Not like this. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice light. "What do you think? Do I look okay?" She was beautiful. No one could deny that. But the beauty was hollow to him now. There was nothing warm about her smile. It was all a performance. And the worst part? She didn't even seem to notice that it was no longer a performance for him. "Yeah, you look great," Lucas said, his voice flat. He could hear how dead it sounded in his ears, but he couldn't bring himself to care. She didn't notice anyway. She was too busy texting someone, probably Raphael or Matthias, laughing at something they had said. His heart sank. "This is what I've been reduced to," he thought. The guy standing next to the woman who was too busy texting her exes to even look him in the eye. The guy who was supposed to be the center of her world, but who had been cast aside like an extra in a movie. As she fiddled with her phone, Lucas stood there, watching her, unable to shake the feeling that something was slipping out of his hands. He didn't even recognize the woman in front of him anymore. He didn't recognize the woman who had once made him feel like he was the only one who mattered. Now it was clear. He was just another guy in her long list of men. But as she finally looked up at him, her eyes sparkling with excitement, all Lucas could do was nod. What else could he do? "Everything's going to be perfect, right?" she asked, her voice hopeful, like she was waiting for confirmation from him. But Lucas didn't feel that hope anymore. He didn't even know what to say. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, perfect." But in his mind, everything was falling apart. It was as if he was watching his life unravel in front of him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The day dragged on, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that he was drowning. The wedding wasn't about love, it was about appearances, and he wasn't interested in playing that game anymore. But the real question was, how was he supposed to back out of this without destroying everything? How could he walk away without burning every bridge in sight? The wedding was supposed to be the beginning of their new life together. But as Lucas stared at Laura, his bride-to-be, he realized that he had already left this relationship behind. What he had to figure out now was how to walk away from the life he had built, without it all collapsing in on him. The final moment had arrived. The wedding day. The day that had once felt like a dream, a promise of the future, now seemed like a hollow reminder of everything that had gone wrong. As Laura prepared at the beauty salon, Lucas sat in their apartment, his mind made up. He couldn't go through with it. He couldn't stand there, pretending to be someone he wasn't, in a life he didn't recognize anymore. Without a second thought, he started doing the unthinkable. He called the venue and canceled the reservation. The party? Canceled. The DJ? Canceled. The flowers, the dresses, the hotel bookings for the guests? All gone. He wasn't loud. He didn't make a scene. He didn't cause a commotion. He simply erased everything, quietly, without hesitation. It wasn't a rash decision. It was calculated. He had been silent for too long, bending over backward to make things work for her. But this time, his silence wasn't weakness. It was his strength. His decision was final. By the time Laura finally got back to the apartment, excited about getting ready, she found Lucas in the living room, sitting still, his expression unreadable. She noticed right away that he wasn't in his suit, wasn't getting ready. "What's going on, Lucas?" she asked, her voice light, as if expecting him to be nervous, to be scrambling with excitement like the others. But when he met her gaze, it was different. His eyes were steady, calm, and for the first time in days, he didn't look away. "I'm not your accessory, Laura," he said simply, his voice low but clear. "I'm a person, and I won't be part of this anymore." It wasn't an angry outburst. It wasn't dramatic. It was the truth, raw and unembellished. He had spent so much time hiding behind his quiet nature, assuming that everything would just work out. But that wasn't his job anymore. He wasn't just a supporting character in her story. He was his own person, and it was time she knew that. Laura stood there for a long moment, blinking in disbelief. He could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed his words. But instead of the apology or the understanding he hoped for, she seemed caught off guard, even a little confused. "You can't be serious, Lucas," she finally managed to say, her voice wavering. "We've worked so hard for this, for us." But Lucas didn't flinch. "I've worked hard, Laura. I've worked for you. But I'm not going to sacrifice myself for a life where I don't even matter. You're not going to use me anymore." Her face twisted slightly, but Lucas could see that there was nothing left to say. He had made up his mind, and there was no turning back. She tried again, softer this time. "But we're getting married, Lucas. This is what you wanted, isn't it?" He shook his head slowly. "No, Laura. This isn't what I wanted. I wanted respect. I wanted a partnership. Not a stage where I stand around while everyone else gets to shine." The words hit harder than he expected, but there was no regret. There was only peace in that moment. He had said what needed to be said, and he wasn't waiting for her to fix it. He was done pretending, done trying to make something work that wasn't meant to. The next morning was chaos. Lucas wasn't there. The venue staff showed up expecting to set up, only to find out the wedding had been canceled. The florist, the catering team, the DJ, everyone was left in confusion. And when Laura showed up at the venue, dressed and ready for her perfect day, she was greeted with nothing but empty space. For the first time, she had no one to blame but herself. There was no one else to point fingers at. The world she had created, with all its glossy images of what should have been, collapsed in front of her. Lucas didn't care. He wasn't there to witness it. He wasn't there to see the panic or the confusion in her eyes. He was already gone. He had packed a bag, caught a flight, and left everything behind. He wasn't running away from her. He was running towards something much more important, his freedom. He wasn't searching for explanations or apologies. He wasn't looking to be understood. He was done with all of that. He was taking control of his life, finally putting himself first. The plane ride to Lisbon was long, but it was the first time in a while that Lucas felt at peace. The hum of the engine was soothing, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel like he was drowning. The weight that had been sitting on his chest was finally lifted. He was free. When he landed in Lisbon, he didn't have a plan, other than to live. He didn't know what was next. But for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare him. He wandered through the city streets, breathing in the fresh air, taking in the beauty of a place that was his. Not Laura's, not her mother's, not anyone else's. It was his. And for the first time, Lucas felt like he had room to breathe. He wasn't defined by the people around him. He wasn't an accessory to someone else's dream. He was the main character of his own story, and that was more than enough. As the days passed, Lucas settled into a new rhythm. He worked remotely, keeping up with his clients and finding new opportunities. He found a quiet apartment with a view of the river, a place where he could think without distractions. He spent his afternoons walking through the cobblestone streets, meeting new people who didn't care about his past, who saw him for who he was, not who he had been. And as the weeks went on, he realized that the more he distanced himself from his old life, the more he began to heal. He didn't need validation from Laura, from Helena, or anyone else. He didn't need to prove his worth to anyone who couldn't see it. He had done the hardest thing of all. He had chosen himself. It wasn't just about leaving a marriage behind. It was about reclaiming his own life, his freedom. And no matter what came next, Lucas knew one thing for certain. He would never allow anyone to take that from him again.